Hey everybody, how we doing today? Well, you know what? I've had an interesting experience. I was talking with one of my nephews and I found out that he's discovered a love for something that was very dear to my heart. Magic the Gathering. Yeah, good old Magic. Right there. Yep. Some of my favorite memories from my youth are around that game. They were surrounded by friends and other people who we played Magic together. It was a huge social aspect. It had fantasy. It required reading, which is largely probably one of the reasons why I became a good reader, because it introduced me to things that I like to read. It was kind of my first introduction to the concept of reading about fantasy. It was also my gateway into things like D&D and other nerdcraft type things. And one of the things I loved about Magic was it didn't encapsulate like other things did. Back in the 90s, if you were really into computers, this is before the internet made everything cool, you know, that was considered to be a certain subsect of geek. If you just played D&D, then you were this other kind of just subsect. Yet, people who played Magic, we kind of crossed all barriers. We had the D&D nuts. We had the computer nerds. We had the guys like me who were lifting weights and playing football while at the same time not waiting for practice to be over so I can go play a game of Magic. And it was an all-encompassing thing, and it fits so well, and it helped me with a lot of things. It helped me with reading, it helped me learn math, it taught me a lot about critical thinking. And because Magic is so open and so fluid to self-creation inside itself, that it teaches you how to think for yourself, how to find ways to do things, how to problem solve. And it really excites me to find out that one of my nephews has found a love of this game for himself. Well, that's caused me to, after more than 10 to 12 years roughly since the last time I picked up any of my cards, I dug them out of a box, and thanks to a video I watched from the professor over at the Tolarian Academy, I got my cards out of this card box that had been sitting there and slowly decaying. Though it's pretty good, it lasted for a while, it did. But we got out of that, and we have our cards now inside our Stanley 10 compartment tool. I bought 3 of these to spread out our love of everything. Now, that's just me organizing my loose cards. Well, now we're going to delve into the decks that I made 10 or more years ago, and I thought that we would take a look at those together. Now, when I started playing Magic, for me, my absolute love was my Goblin deck. It was everything for me. So, what I'm going to share with you guys today is the going through and revealing of my Goblin deck. So let's take a look at it together and go down memory lane. Alright, let's get started. Alright, so shaky camera, let's stop that. Here we go. I'm actually going to turn the deck over so that way you guys will hopefully see these cards right side up instead of upside down. And let's go through the deck together. The Goblins, so it's a Goblin card. 1/1 Skirk Prospector. Sacrifice a Goblin, add 1 red mana to your mana pool. This was a card that, actually, if I remember correctly, was a pretty big part of a infinite white mana, or a infinite colorless mana, I should say, combo that I had in this deck at one time. Our next card is Mog Conscripts, which is a 2/2 for 1 Goblin card, who kind of he was always a great blocker or good sacrifice food. He never somebody who I remember attacking with due to the fact that he couldn't attack unless I had summoned a creature that turn. Fire Diamond, artifact, cost you 2 tap to create 1 fire mana, but it comes into play tapped. I think at one point I may have had like 4 of these in this deck. That was a good card though. And then, of course, lots and lots of basic mountains. Oh, here we go. This was a card. This isn't the original card that I had. The original one I had as a kid actually got water damaged, and I had to buy another one years later. It was the Goblin King, and I remember this card being such a big deal when I got it because it gave it's a 1 colorless mana and 2 mountains, so it's a 3 cost for a 2/2. All goblins get 1/1, +1/+1, and have Mountain Walk, which meant, if I remember correctly, it meant anyone that had mountains for land on their side of the table, I could attack them and they couldn't block my creatures, which was huge. I remember that was such a big deal. I also remember there being a lot of argument as a kid as to whether or not the +1/+1 actually went to the Goblin King, since it says Lord and didn't say Goblin. But I seem to remember that being clarified. He does get it. And then our next card, that's another mountain. Oh, this was one of the cards I got right before I quit playing, actually. That's a Goblin Cohort. It's basically the Mog Conscripts all over again. It's a 1 cost for a mountain for a 2/2, but you can only attack on turns that you've summoned a creature. Another mountain. This was another card that I acquired right before I quit playing, and that's a Flameweave Invoker. And I thought there was so much potential with him. He costs 3, 2 colorless and a mountain for a 2/2, but if you tap 7 colorless plus a mountain, so an 8 cast total, he could deal 5 damage to target player. And that, it was kind of like having a reusable Goblin Grenade, and if you had the mana to cast him, why not? Matter of fact, I'm going to set him aside, and I will set aside this guy, and the cards are still in here that I think there are. We will talk about them a little more. More land, more land. Oh no, almost dropped a card. Here we go. Here's another card that I got not long before I quit playing. A Goblin Char Belcher. It's an artifact card, costs 4 colorless to play, pay 3 and tap it, and you get to rummage through the library basically 1 card at a time until you hit a land card. And you deal that amount of damage to the target player, or if it's a mountain card you reveal as the land card, you deal 2 times the damage to target player. This early in the game could end the game right away. And even in a multiplayer game, putting one of these out, I remember used to get you a lot of crowd hate. Mana Echoes. Okay, this was huge. You had to be really careful with this because it costs, it's an enchantment, and it costs 2 colorless and 2 mountains, so 4 cast. But every time you played a creature, you could have it generate a colorless mana for every creature that it shared creature type with that you had on the board. So this could get out of hand really quickly, I remember, and mana burn was a big risk with this. Though, after finding out that I was going to get back into this and I went and read over the new rules, I see that mana burn is no longer an issue, so this card has a whole lot more power. I'm actually going to throw him over here, and there's something I can do with him I'll talk about later on. Oh, this is actually one of the other cards. Okay, Goblin Warrens. This was a phenomenal card. It's an it's an enchantment, so it comes out, stays out. Costs you 2 colorless and a mountain. But for 2 colorless and a mountain, every time after, you'd sacrifice 2 goblins and get 3 goblin tokens back. So you could generate a huge number of goblins. We're actually going to throw him aside and talk about him as well. This is another one, Skirtfire Marshal. This was a great card. He has protection from red, so he can protect himself. He was 3 colorless and 2 mountains, so he's a total of a 5 cast for a 2/2. But if I tapped 5 goblins who were untapped, he would deal 10 damage to everything and everyone across the board except himself. He was a nuclear option in this deck. Someone's going to wipe out all my stuff, fine, let me just help you out and take all of your stuff at the same time, because it's not often somebody actually has a creature stronger than a 10. We already talked about a Goblin cohort. Goblin Mountaineers, they were just a pretty standard little foot soldier. 1 mountain for a 1/1, but these guys were especially cool because they had mountain walk. So if you're playing another player who had mountains, you know, just attack them every turn for 1. That'll get annoying real quick. Another Char Belcher. Oh, okay. Here's a card I picked up. This is another one I actually picked up and added to this deck right before I quit playing. And this is a Frizzed Goblin. So he's a 1 mountain for a 1/1. But whenever he attacks, you can pay a mountain and for that mount, and then pick a creature. That creature can't block that turn. And since it's not a tapping ability, you could pay multiple times on the ability and basically stop anybody from blocking, which was awesome because it doesn't say that the creature can't block him. It says creature can't block. So it was a way of basically nullifying and getting all of your goblins through somebody's defenses. The Goblin Dynamo. This guy was, for a goblin, he's considered pretty big. So he's 5 colorless and 2 mountains, so he's a 7 cast for a 4/4. If you tap him, you can deal 1 damage to target creature or player, so he can be a quick little pecker and just peck at everybody. Or you could pay a mountain plus X, tap him and sacrifice him to deal that damage to a creature or a player. So it was like having a living fireball on the table that you could be like, you know, it's time to do it, and light him up. Bright Stone, an absolute must-have for a Goblin deck. You pay 1 mana or 1 mountain, and you get an additional red mana or mountain mana for every goblin you have on the table. And not just, I believe it's for every goblin in play. So that means it doesn't even have to be your goblins. If somebody else happens to have goblins, they're feeding your mana right there. Awesome if you have an X damage spell that you're trying to get out. Another mountain, another Char Belcher. Another Mana Echoes, because 1 is never enough. Oh, Seething Song. This was kind of cool, but it's a basic mana bump. You pay 3, you get 5. Not as cool as the versions that you see in black decks where they have threshold. I wish this had threshold, so you only had to pay 2 or 1 for it. That would have been awesome. A Goblin War Chief. Now, the Goblin War Chief, if I remember correctly, came out as kind of a supplementation to. I think I got that out of a pre-constructed deck. I can't remember, but 1 colorless and 2 mountains, and getting him early in the game is really awesome because he makes all of your goblins cost 1 less colorless to play. So if you have some of those bigger goblins, hey, but also he gives all of your creatures haste. So as long as he's out, all your goblins have haste, and if you're creating goblin tokens, they can attack the same turn. Another Goblin cohort. Fire Diamond, gotta love them. Alright, a Bordo Signet. Again, this was just kind of a way to get alternative mana reserves. You pay 2, you play the artifact. Next turn, instead of your mountain, just tapping a mountain, I could tap the mountain to tap this, which would then give me 2. So it was like having an extra land, essentially. The Reckless one. This guy was really cool, especially if you got him, not so much late game, but mid game, because by mid game you had lots of goblins, and you'd bring this guy out. He already has haste on him, so you don't even have to worry about having the War Chief, and his power and toughness is equal to how many goblins exist. So downside is, if you only have him, he's a 1/1, but if you have 10, 12, 20, 30 or more tokens on the field, this guy's power is equal, and toughness are equivalent to that. I think my record that I ever had him at personally was not in my pure Goblin deck, but in a when I had a combination in here. I'll actually put him aside and talk about that combination in a little bit. Here's another good one for you. Goblin War Strike. So, first of all, it's 1 mountain for the sorcery, and you deal 1 damage to target player for every goblin you control. Which again, if you're pumping out goblins, this could be 1 damage to infinite damage. And I always loved the flavor text, fire, aim, ready, because that's totally the goblin way. Let's see here. Oh, this is another Signet. Again, 2 mana, and just it gave you something else that you could produce. This I remember first went into my deck because of the fact that it created a forest, which was key to some cards that I have in my side deck for another combination that we could talk about in a little bit. Another Seething Song. Another Signet. Fire Diamonds. Brightstone we already talked about. Let's pick this up. Let's see here. We already talked about that. We already talked about him. So we only have 1 here that we haven't talked about, and that is our Palm Incinerator. The Palm Incinerator is a 2 colorless and a mountain, so a 3 cast for a 2/1 goblin. Now this has a cycling ability, so if you were going to, so you can discard this card from your hand, pay its cycling, and deal X damage to target creature, where X is the number of goblins in play. So if you have a lot of little goblins and somebody plays some big old dragon like Shivan, or worse yet, some guy's got like a Leviathan on the table, then he decides to give it flight, so you can't even overpower it with lots of little goblins to stop it. You throw this guy out there, cycle him, and boom. Big creature's not so scary anymore. Now, we had set some cards aside, so let's see if I remember how this worked. I remember you needed to have Goblin Warrens, this, and okay, so, and you needed to have at least 3 land, if I remember correctly. Land, where is a land? There we go. So if I remember how this used to work correctly, you would have 3 land and a couple of cheap goblins like that. So you'd start off your turn with 3 cheap goblins on the field that you didn't really, actually you didn't need 3, you just needed 2. So 2 cheap goblins on the field, and you'd want to have something like your Flame Wave Evoker nearby, Because what you would do is you'd tap the 3 to cause the Goblin Warren effect to happen. And these guys would go away and be replaced with 3 more goblins, which would cause the mana echoes, giving you the mana echoes would kick in and give you 4 gray mana, sacrificing a goblin to then create the red mana you need. And then you just kind of keep repeating this process. So each time this goes to 3, but this slowly climbs up, and eventually you could do that, hypothetically, you do that infinitely and create an infinite number of colorless mana. Now you'd have to be careful with that in the past because of mana burn, though nowadays without mana burn mattering, it doesn't really play a factor. And then in the end you'd sacrifice all 3 of your goblins to create 3 red mana and activate this guy's ability three times to destroy somebody completely. Another cool thing that you could do, and I don't have it in this deck it seems, so let's see if I have it in my sideboard. So sideboard used to contain a dual land, 2 more signets that had the ability to produce forests, another dual land, and 2 copies of Earthcraft. Now, Earthcraft wasn't allowed in all circles, but if you were playing with somebody who didn't play off the banned list that we had back then, or allowed Earthcraft to be played, then you essentially wouldn't need the Prospector anymore. Earthcraft takes the Prospector's place and allows you to now, with Goblin Warrens, you don't need this either. You just use that in combination with Goblin Warrens, and as long as you had 2 goblins to start the sacrifice process, you could create an infinite number of goblins, which was just, and then you could also, at that rate, because you have an infinite number of goblins, you can reuse the same mana infinitely thanks to the Earthcraft. You could use this guy's ability infinitely, and you have infinite damage to go around the board. But that was kind of a combo cheesy way I remember to play. I don't remember playing that way very often, which is why these were always up in the sideboard. Matter of fact, I'm still using the same single sleeve for my sideboard that I did years ago. And I must have bought a card in it that cost 50 cents because it says Fantasy Books and Games. I wonder if that place is still in business. Anyhow, guys, this is a look at a 10-year-old Goblin deck. And I know there's some cards out there that have come out that I should probably add to it. If you have any suggestions for what they should be, please leave them down in the comments section. Otherwise, guys, till next time, be good people, have fun doing it, and every day, make gains.